About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org, and Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of these programs, we've learned a lot. Even though the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: our normal awareness, the conscious mind, what keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, the subconscious mind, and what connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, the superconscious mind. We learned that we can change our state of consciousness, so we're aware of different aspects of mind at different times. And then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network in the brain. This means that we perceive, we see, hear, taste, and feel what we expect to experience based on the past. We also saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, and before we're aware of it. Some experiments have even demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart have been flatlined and the person has been declared dead. And we learned that no one has yet been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue. Based on all this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is, in fact, the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. This field may be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches around the body in what some say is an egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Mind, then, is best understood as a field, a pattern of energy that exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and the brain. The brain, in this model, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body as the subconscious mind. We've learned that this field of mind affects energy and matter in a variety of ways, ranging from the quantum physics experiment called the double slit, in which matter or energy shows up depending on whether a mind is present to observe them, the way that people's bodies and their pets have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, and the effect that human minds have had on what are called random number generators on individual computers and in the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and several fields may vibrate along similar patterns, resonating with each other, so that means that minds affect each other across space and time. And a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field, and they're equating our mind or mind field with the quantum or 0-point field out of which all matter and energy arises. Some researchers are even using the equations of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the way that consciousness contributes to the formation of matter. Others are exploring how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in the information we receive from the world, primarily through the left hemisphere of the cerebrum, and from our mind, primarily through the right hemisphere. So these understandings help explain things like what's called the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on. It explains how dreams affect the body and consciousness, how music affects brain and body and connects us with other fields of mind, how we can enhance or slow down healing through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations, and how the belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing in the placebo effect. How remote viewing and telekinesis work, and how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync, maximizing our effectiveness. You can catch up on these past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips and books and authors that I mention. Now, in these past weeks, we have looked at the idea that our individual mind is part of a larger field, which may be part of a larger field, and a larger field ad infinitum, and that the ultimate field in our universe has been called the quantum field or the 0-point field, and we looked a little bit at Lynn McTaggart's work with that. And today I want to spend a little more time with Ervin Laszlo, who is calling that field the Akashic field. Now, last week, we were hearing from Nazim Haramein, who was saying that the space-time continuum is not really a continuum with time because time is a human construct to make sense of our memories. He's calling the continuum in which the universe is formed and reforming the space memory continuum. And this totally is in alignment with what Ervin Laszlo is saying. He is suggesting that what the ancient Hindus called the Akash, that field out of which everything emerges and in which everything that has ever happened is still stored, is the most precise and accurate name for the field that permeates this universe. He is calling it the Akashic field. And I'll let him talk about some of his ideas.
Nature, the universe, is not something mechanical and passive. It's something dynamic and something highly connected. Now, when things around us are connected intensely, so that one thing, when you touch one thing, all the others are touched, are felt. When this happens, then you talk about a field. A field connects that. There are all kinds of fields. There are electromagnetic fields, there are gravitational fields, there are quantum fields, and there are fields that we didn't really think existed, and it turns out that they do exist, and they are laws of a field which you can identify as the Akashic field. Why? Because the Hindu seers 3,000 years ago talked about the dimension that encompasses all the other dimensions, but is deeper than them, something which is the womb of all other things. And when we talk about the laws, these immutable laws of the field, we can talk about Akashic field, because the Akashic field is beyond all the other fields. That's the primal, the original field. That's the source of all fields. Now, these laws of the Akashic field are the laws of the universe, of the origin, of the source of the universe. And what are they? Well, you have to read the book to find out. But let me tell you a couple of things about them. These laws make for a universe, make for a reality around us, of which we are a part, a reality of connection, interconnection, such intense, intrinsic interconnection that all the things in it act as one. There is a true oneness in the quantum universe, in the quantum field, the grand unified field, as it's also known in science, or the 0-point field. Because even at the 0 point of energy, there is something, there is information, there are things happening, there are laws operative.
So this scientist from Hungary who works in Vienna is helping us to understand that everything in the universe is so interconnected that anything done anywhere affects the whole. Well, this is the fundamental systems principle. If you have a system, you can never do one thing. Every action, every thought affects the whole. It's all one. Now, Laszlo goes on from there to talk about the fact that it's not just a field out of which everything emerges. It is also a field in which all energy is stored. It is also a field in which all information that has ever happened, that has ever been generated, is stored.
What we normally experience in the ordinary level of the beta level of the electroencephalograph is a very limited segment of the information that is existing in the world, that it will be accessible in principle. We can't access everything, but a lot more could be accessed if we allow our mind to access it, to remove the blindfolds which go with the everyday chatter of the world, the superficial element. On deeper levels of the frequencies, and on much higher frequencies as well, we live through, we experience realities that are not accessible on the ordinary, everyday level. So it's up to us to open our mind, to open our consciousness, so we can expand the range of our perceptions. I don't think information can be completely erased. It can be transformed, it can be ignored to some extent, it can't be erased. Energy can't be created, can't be erased. And the same is information. Space and time are also there. It can be furnished, can be created, things can be created in it or with it or through it, but they can't be erased. The deepest levels of reality are eternal.
The deepest levels of reality are eternal. Information cannot be erased. Information, like energy, cannot be erased, cannot be destroyed. So who and what we are, or what we have been, is always present. And as Haramin was helping us understand last week, we can have access to it. Laszlo says we can't have access to it in our normal waking consciousness, but we can go to deeper levels and higher frequencies of consciousness on the electroencephalogram and begin to have access to this information. Now, those who have been studying meditation or have been in various forms of prayer research are aware that this is what happens. This is exactly what happens. As we step out of the state of consciousness, which is our normal state, and enter into one of those states of consciousness in which most of what goes on in our body, in our subconscious, or in which most of what's going on in our superconscious is available to us, then we are actually accessing that field of energy of which our mind, that field of information of which our mind, our sense of self, our essential beingness is a part, the one that cannot be created or destroyed, and in which every single thought, action, and word affects the whole. Pretty powerful stuff, given that most of us were trained to think that we were isolated individuals, unable to have any impact on the world around us except through material means. Well, I guess we were taught wrong. And I hope that people will begin to do the things that will allow them to have access to this deeper and wider and broader and higher information that can help us be more effective in our life experience. Now, I met Dr. Laszlo when I was a grad student. He was one of the founders of what was called then the Club of Rome, which led to the Limits of Growth book and led to a number of other studies. And the study that I participated in was called Goals for a Global Community. And I worked with the people who had written this study called Changing Images of Man, which I referred to a while back on one of the shows. And we were outlining what it would take for our planet to be experiencing community as a whole. And one of the fundamental understandings was beginning to operate in states of consciousness that were deeper and higher than our normal waking consciousness, that were not affected by the fear and control that had been imbued in most of Western culture, at least, for the last several thousand years. A global community is the obvious outcome from a global consciousness, a global mind, a universal mind, the Akashic field. Well, all right, if you've just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, a radio show exploring what consciousness is, how it works, and how our lives can be greatly enhanced as we understand it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, your host, and that sound tells me it's time to look at a book. Answer any questions you email to me at ruth@noeticmoments.org. And maybe take a look at what's going on in the news that can help us understand the role our state of consciousness plays in our experience. And today, I ran across a YouTube while I was scanning for possible resources for the show, and it was a different sort of YouTube. Someone had collected a bunch of the interviews that George Harrison, one of the founding members of the Beatles, was making over the years, talking about his ideas about consciousness. And I thought you might enjoy hearing some of that.
For me, going to India and hearing somebody saying, no, you can't believe anything until you have direct perception of it. And I thought, wow, fantastic, at last, find somebody who makes some sense. And so I wanted to go deeper and deeper into that.
The whole basis of religion is to have the experience, have that perception. So there's these methods for God perception, self-realization, which is yoga and meditation and the process you have to get from a spiritual master, somebody who's an authority on this sort of thing. And the technique we did with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was a form of silent meditation, which, you can transcend. The purpose is to transcend from this relative state of consciousness to an absolute state of consciousness. People think this is me, and this isn't me, it's just a bag of bones. Basically, everybody is spirit, which is the state of being, pure consciousness. So, through many years of pollution of consciousness through material energy and this association, then we've all ended up in a fallen state. But really, everybody is basically potentially divine. So yoga, all these methods are really ancient methods just to further pollution of your system and consciousness and to cleanse the system. The whole thing, the purity that they talk about in religion is really a mental, physical and spiritual purity, which is obtained through discipline and through practice.
Through discipline and through practice, we can cleanse our mind, our bodies, our thoughts, begin to operate in a state of consciousness that Laszlo says is beyond our normal beta state on the electroencephalograph and allows us to access the universal field, the one, the oneness that we all are. And that is what George Harrison found in India and what became the hallmark of a lot of the music that he wrote afterwards, especially the ones that he wrote not with the Beatles band. For those of us who were around when the Beatles showed up, it was an amazing opening. The idea that rock and roll could be melodic, could have a lot of levels of harmony and could be as mind-opening as some of the songs in folk rock or folk music had been for us, was just phenomenally opening and freeing. What a delight for all of us. And to continue this conversation about the quantum nature of mind and field and accessing it through alternative states of consciousness, I'm going to go into the alternative state of consciousness known as quantum physics with Roger Penrose's book, The Emperor's New Mind. This is not new. This book came out in 1989. And it's had a number of new editions, of course. And he was attempting to help people get a handle on the nature of computers and the nature of brain and mind so that people would realize what the limitations of a traditional digital computer are and what the potentials for a quantum computer might be if the brain is, in fact, a quantum device. And he does a lovely job explaining what the brain is and how it works. So if you have access to this book, The Emperor's New Mind, Concerning Computers, Minds, and the Laws of Physics by Sir Roger Penrose, I strongly recommend it just for his summary of the brain and how it works. The book has a number of chapters, of course, and the first chapter is, Can a Computer Have a Mind? And he's looking at what is AI and what is the Turing test and what the idea of strong AI versus traditional software might be. And strong AI are the people who are saying that we can build computers that ultimately are the same as human brains or human minds. He talks about the way the algorithms are designed. He talks about mathematics. He's a mathematical physicist. He talks about the reality of numbers and complex numbers and the recognition that there are ways to understand it that are not necessarily quantitative, which is nice, but then he goes into how the quantitative truth and proof in Chapter 4, Truth, Proof, and Insight, how quantitatively things can be proven, and particularly complexity theory and the compatibility in physical things. He goes on then, a very nice summary of classical physics. Chapter 5 is the classical world and ends with mass, matter, and reality. And then Chapter 6 begins to explain quantum physics. He explores how quantum theory begins to address the problems that are present in the classical model of physics. And he goes into all kinds of things. He goes into spin, and he goes into many particle systems, and the Einstein-Podolsky paradox, and Schrodinger's equation, all that good stuff. Then he gets into cosmology, the idea of time flowing in a particular direction. This is related to the idea of entropy, and his chapter is The Inexorable Increase of Entropy. What is entropy? The second law in action, the tendency of things to fall back to the minimal state is all there. And then he talks about quantum gravity. And then finally in Chapter 9, he talks about real brains and model brains. And that's where I was suggesting you might enjoy seeing what he talks about. He does a nice summary of various experiments through 1990-something, and then talks about how computer models do not allow for some very fundamental aspect of the brain, can be called brain plasticity. That is, the brain changes its structure on a moment's notice, which computers cannot do. However, the brain does so not just incrementally, that is to say, a particular part changes in a moment, but it will change the whole system given an intense memory experience in just the second. And all of us have had that experience where we've had this intense thing and suddenly the world is very different. This is a quantum phenomenon related to what Laszlo was saying about the Akashic field. You change one thing and the whole must change. And to be able to get in touch with that process and to facilitate that process is what George Harrison was aiming for in what he was calling transcendental meditation that he learned from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So Roger Penrose's book, The Emperor's New Mind, gives us a scientific basis for understanding how it is that AI cannot exactly replicate the human experience, and more than that, how the brain can be totally plastic in response to shifts in our consciousness, in our awareness, in our understanding of the structure of all that is, which can be through physical experience, as long as it isn't filtered too much by the brain's sensory filters, but more often than not is through a direct apprehension with the mind. And so consciousness, the field of all that is all one and is constantly evolving and transforming. And this means there is no end. There is only constant new beginnings. What a great way to think about life's potential. Well, that's it for today's show. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org. where there are links to archived past shows, along with the titles and other resources referred to on the show, and where there's a form that you can use to send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.